Great.
All right,
What's
so
up?
yeah, so first I want to thank you for joining me on this interview.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
no, thank you. So, how was the Ground Up Festival?
Oh man, it's amazing. It's an overwhelming avalanche of music, and it's also, one of the comments that I kept hearing from people is that they expected it to be bigger physically. That it was going to be just this huge, huge, massive crush of people, trash everywhere, and just, yeah, like festival experiences
Yeah,
off and
yeah,
on. And it's not. It's like an artisanal festival. It's like a boutique. Like everybody there is just 100% music loving. Focused on the experience. Everybody's got their different favorite thing that they're there for, and it's just an amazing energy to go into that kind of space. And then obviously the level of talent of people that are playing, it's crazy. It's happening everywhere, and in such a kind of a low key kind of a way. Um, I mean, it's got to be kind of the best festival, certainly like that in the world. If what you're going for is massive spectacle with lasers and smoke and exploding things, like, well, actually we've got that too, but
really.
on the bigger stages, there's only one bigger stage. Yeah,
Mm.
there's like more lighting and stuff like that, but you know then you'll go around the corner, of the building where it's like the education building, one day, and there'll be a crowd of people standing there watching Richard Bono play with Chris Potter and you know cats, doing stuff. And it's amazing. Ground Up Festival was great.
Yeah,
It was
you
great.
had. I mean, this year had an incredible lineup, and you had obviously Snarky Puppy. You had Ghost Note. You had Chris Potter. Was Esperanza Spalding there?
No, she wasn't there this year.
Okay,
Yeah,
so yeah.
uh, but yeah, I mean, it was a crazy lineup. Andrew Bird, my
Oh,
old my old schoolmate, and gosh, Susanna Baca,
ooh,
and
nice.
I mean, just incredible, incredible people.
And
You
did you
know,
guys play any of the new stuff from this new album?
all of it got played. We actually, for the first time in Snarky Puppy history, the entire band got got to where we were all going early. We got the Tuesday before the festival started, and we rehearsed all day, every day,
Wow.
until the festival started, which is great. It was, really, really challenging and amazing to hear. I mean, we all experienced this music coming to life in the studio. I mean, this music didn't even really exist until we were down in Texas doing it, and so it's definitely
Mm,
never ever seen the light of day or been played. And none of us remembered what we played. We were in the studio working on stuff and running back to our rooms to try to practice this crazy thing that Bill just wrote, and you
yeah.
know taping a cheat sheet for you on the whatever, try different, take five of this thing, which we're changing the arrangement. And I mean, it was crazy just to go in there and then hear the album after it had been mixed, and
Mm,
go back in time just a few months to think, what, is that me? Am I doing that?
yeah.
Oh yeah, wow, I think that really is me. Oh yeah, now I remember. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So I
Super.
saw some of the videos. You know, like you guys, the way you guys communicate with each other is like da 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 da.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, right. There's that thing. Uh-huh. That was a very funny video, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that one of the signature things about Snarky Puppy is the level of detail in the ensemble playing, especially as spearheaded by the horn players. And, I'm most of the time falling in with them. I'm usually doubling trumpet and saxophone lines, more so than the guitar parts and stuff
Mm,
like that.
all right.
Sometimes I'll jump. back and forth. Sometimes I'll have my own little thing or, take a melody, but a lot of times I'm playing with the horns. And those guys are just at the top of their game and are
Yeah,
just
yeah.
some of the best, and
Insane.
they're completely insane. And yeah, everybody out there, should, know if they are into the snarky horns that yes, they do talk about this stuff a lot. They do, there's some good-natured, I don't want to say arguing, but it's not really arguing, but calling
Passionate
each other,
discourse.
passionate discourse,
Yeah.
and when the stuff is not exactly right, it's not good enough,
Hmm.
and
There's
it's
that
really,
thrive
really,
for excellence and always trying to push boundaries.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really exciting to be a part of a group of musicians that are demanding that of themselves. It of course makes you demand that of yourself, and I think that's where we all want to be. Whatever it is that we do in life, whether it's music or cooking or teaching or medicine or something like that, ideally nobody wants to kind of skate,
Hmm.
through life. I think everybody wants to try to reach their potential, and I feel very, very, very lucky to feel that heat
Well, it definitely
from
is
this band.
exciting listening to you guys. I can't imagine how it would be playing with you guys.
Man, it's the playing part of it. I think in a lot of ways it's surprisingly easy.
Yeah. Oh.
Because everything, I mean, as long as you have your stuff together, as long as you've got the music together, because the band is so supportive. It's not one of those bands where you get into a situation where you know part of the band is making your life difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Just
Everybody there, all the rhythm sections, even with all the percussions and the drums and the density of everything. I mean, this is a large electroacoustic, super hard hitting
hmm.
jazz crossover, whatever you want to call it, type band that plays with dynamics.
Yeah. Well,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. That
I mean,
definitely can be
this
heard.
yeah, I talk, I I don't want to say I complain, but uh, let's just say that as a violin player, it's refreshing to play with a band like that and to play with a band in jazz that uses dynamics as part of the music.
Yeah, and I would like to talk to you about that. But before we continue, I just want to let the people who are watching this who don't really know who Zach Brock is. I wanna I'd like for you to kind of talk a little bit about your origins. So you're from Kentucky, right? You started playing violin at what age? What did you start playing violin?
I think I was 4. I started playing. You want me to tell you? You want the origin story?
I mean,
I
whatever you
can do
want.
it. I can do it fast. I started playing violin when I was 4. I started playing Suzuki violin, and I was coming up sort of simultaneously playing classical music as a kid, but also my parents at the time, besides being into classical music and listening to a lot of jazz around the house, we were doing a lot of folk music.
Hmm.
And that was kind of a big part of my early childhood. And that's where I first got encouragement to improvise, in some of these very informal settings in people's living rooms. There's still these groups in Kentucky where people pass on the traditional music in the traditional way, which is, getting together over at so and so's house and putting a bunch of folding chairs around in a circle and everybody just passing the tune around.
Yeah, and that's
And so,
very
yeah.
interesting because you're a classically trained violinist and you go to a northwestern, right?
Hmm.
And which is a big school in classical music, and then you eventually kind of make the switch to jazz in a way, kind of like the John-Luc Ponty story. But I think for me, what's more curious about you is, people ask you, how did you get from classical to jazz? But how did you get from Kentucky to classical? Like you were saying, there's a lot of folk in
Yeah.
Kentucky, but you don't hear much about classical music coming from there.
Yeah. Well, I know that's a weird. It's just a funny thing, you know. I mean, the principal second violinist or whatever of Toscanini's orchestra back in the in the 50s in New York was a guy from Kentucky. This guy Harry Lukoski, who did Stringsville. Kentucky is a weird place. Also, a lot of people think that Kentucky, because a lot of people talk like that down there and got that real kind of Kentucky diphthong, got
Kentucky
the mountain
bourbon.
thing like that. Yeah, I mean, it's identified, I think, by a lot of people as being south, and like even some people that don't know so much the geography of the United States think that Kentucky is by Alabama,
Yeah.
but Kentucky is actually like kind of right in the middle, like if you look at it. So that being said, it does have very, very, very strong Southern cultural roots, but there's also roots coming, from all over. And I think like most places, some of the smaller states in the U.S., there's kind of like, I mean, obviously, there's not like the urban expanse of something like Chicago or L.A. or New York or something like that. But there's towns and there's cities. Louisville, Kentucky is kind of the bigger city. Lexington, where I grew up, is right in the middle, and it's a college town with a very big university and like the biggest medical school in town. So we're in Kentucky, but like in places like Lexington, there's a lot of people who, because it's like an international university, there's a lot of people that come from all over the world. So it's a little bit more. It's not like we're in a holler.
Yeah.
In that way.
Not like in the middle of nowhere.
All you have to do is drive. Yeah, you can drive an hour east and be right there. But the associate concertmaster of Los Angeles Philharmonic, Nathan Cole, is from Lexington, Kentucky, and also one of the last medalists in the Tchaikovsky violin competition is from Lexington, Kentucky.
Oh, okay, then I know that.
So, yeah, there is like this. There is a thing. There's a classical tradition, but the thing that most people know about Kentucky is bourbon, tobacco, and horse racing.
And Zach Brock.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, getting up to Chicago, it was weird. Like I grew up in Lexington. Like when I finished high school, or I was starting to finish high school, I was not one of those kids that has this crystal clear idea of what they wanted to do.
Like most
so
of
I
us.
think that yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, it's just weird because when you get into the world of performance, you do meet a lot of people who have sort of been doing the same thing that they were doing when they were 7. Especially in the classical world, I guess.
Yeah.
For me, I spent a lot of time trying to decide how I was going to choose between classical music and jazz music. And the problem was, it was almost like each style of music represented one of my parents.
Yeah. Okay.
Seriously. So it was like, who do you love more? Do you love mommy more? Do you love daddy more? And I love them both very much and equally and in different ways. And to me, that's almost sort of, my relationship to the music. Like the more and more jazz I play and like other alternative weirdo violin stuff that I do, the more classical music I play. And and then if I get into a thing where I'm having to play a bunch of stuff that's maybe written on the page, or I'm having to buckle down on some classical stuff, all I want to do is just listen to, Blue Train and, Eddie Lockjaw Davis and, Sonny Rollins and stuff like that. I don't know. That's just what kind of balances me out. Yeah. But, I think that I don't see that I have as much to offer in the classical realm. I love to do it. As long as I can play violin, I'm always going to, practice and try to develop my classical playing because it's so tied into violin playing. And also I genuinely love the music. And to me, it's like reading a great book or, like I want to have my, my fingers on the pulse of that. And and it's a great challenge. It's a never ending challenge. For me to kind of get my stuff together whenever I have to. But God forbid I would ever have to choose. But if I had to choose, I would probably go with improvising in jazz, because that's really the thing where I always feel the most connected.
Yeah, but I mean, even at the same time, you definitely have had a prolific career. In jazz, you play with many jazz greats. Obviously, you're in Snarky Puppy. That in itself is a pretty big deal, especially for a violinist. It's kind of like, I don't know. We're kind of, I guess, like jazz violinists. I guess we're kind of like, in a way, the black sheep of jazz musicians, but at the same time, we're kind of like the gem of jazz musicians, right? As I was talking to you earlier, before the interview, it's kind of like you have a jazz violinist. It's kind of like a one up. It's you go up in prestige.
Yeah, I mean, there are, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, I found that, as I'm sure you have too, that you can stand out from the crowd just a lot easier by the very nature of the instrument that you play. If you're a kid that's got an alto saxophone on his or her back going into the jam session, you're more anonymous, in that way. Somebody comes into the violin, they're immediately noticed, number one, and then number two, they're usually immediately detested.
Yeah.
Both for sound and unsound reasons, both fairly and unjustly. And we talked a lot about that. I mean, I think that you and I both share that same value of, when you enter into a music that has an improvisational language, like jazz. And so for if there's anybody out there that's watching that's not a hardcore jazz aficionado, but thinks about it a little, or knows a little bit about it, it's like, it's not uncommon to, all the time, you'll see piano players taking lessons from drummers, and you'll see saxophone players taking lessons from piano players, and it's a total, it kind of doesn't matter what instrument you play, because we're all accountable to the same standard of the music, depending on what scene you're in and stuff like that. There's going to be there's just the history and the knowledge and the grammar and lingo of jazz, and depending on what crowd you're running with, you might be more specialized in one or the other. But it doesn't matter if you play the piano, or it doesn't matter if you're a singer, or it doesn't matter if you play the bass. Like, you've got to be on the same page. And that's one of the things that I think really initially, drew me to that, to wanting to really get into jazz, as opposed to just kind of staying in the more string improv realm. And I think that's the standard that every string player should hold themselves to. I'm really, really not into people specializing so soon. I know that everybody's got to kind of get an angle, and if you're trying to make a living in music, jazz is about the worst thing that you could possibly pick. Not that it's not possible. I mean, you can definitely do it. But yeah, it's I guess I would say that I would love it if there was more of an awareness of jazz string players, whether they be violinist, violist, cellist, whatever, but in the violin family, not basses, because basses made it.
Yeah, they made it.
Basses made it over a long time ago, but it's like, it should be absolutely, if you see somebody walk into a jam session with a viola or a cello, they should be able to deal at the same level musically as anybody else on that stage, or in that jam session. And you should have that mentality. That should be your morality.
Yeah.
For what you're doing. Don't show up and just think that, because you've got this odd instrument that is a lot more rare, that everything that you play is somehow special, because you're just doing it and you feel it and it's odd. I mean, I guess a lot of times that also sort of is there's some people that play music just to get attention.
Yeah.
And when you're younger, you encounter that a lot more as people kind of, before they mature, there can be that thing of, hey, mommy, look what I can do.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. Some people never ever break out of that.
Yeah.
But then some people start to realize that anything done really well to the level of an art, once again, music, cooking, poetry, science,
everything,
whatever, can act as an amplifier for one's humanity. And it can be something that when you go to that person's restaurant and you experience that level of artistry that they bring to you, that you're actually not left with the feeling of, God, I could never even cook like this. I suck at cooking, and I just. But actually, when you walk away and you think, oh my God, I also have this potential in me to imagine tastes and flavors and smells like this. It's like, it's in me too.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Those moments when we experience that, especially, let's go back to music. My analogies get really, kind of overworked. But those are the ones that I remember forever. Those concerts that I went to where what I was hearing in the concert was something that, you could easily think, I could never do that.
Yeah, and that's like when you look at music with like through an artistic point of view, and then you look at it through like a business point of view, because you were saying like, I have this instrument that is rare, therefore, I can get me places. That's kind of like supply and demand. That's economics. That's not music. There's a demand, right, for rare instruments.
I mean, there's a lot of people doing that now. There's a lot. I mean, the good thing is there's more violin players than ever finding ways of making a living being violinists. I don't necessarily have respect for all of it, but who cares? Because who cares what I respect or don't respect? I mean, I always respect their humanity. I respect everyone as a human being. But yeah, we've all met a lot of people that pick the lowest hanging fruit and are just sort of like, oh yeah, oh man, I'm really into, I'm really into jazz. I want to take some jazz lessons. And then, then they get like a, $500 gig every week playing at a cocktail lounge in some sort of a costume with the DJ, and that's just where it's at for them.
Yeah, it's like, you sucked at your instrument, so you took another instrument that's not that popular, so you can suck at that instrument, but if you suck there, you don't suck as much, and you can make more money being sucky.
Yeah, man. I mean, I know it's a really complicated thing. Also, I can't even hope to understand other people's, motivations and needs, in life and stuff like that. And I'm not standing in judgment of that. But I am inspired by. I'm inspired by seeing. Let's just talk about just like string players. I mean, and this goes for any instrument, but I'm going to say that for string players, when I see somebody play who doesn't sound really like anybody else, even if it's a little rough around the edges or not totally clear in its execution or concept yet, but that to me is just the most exciting thing, because I know that this person is following some sort of a voice that they're hearing they would probably do it on anything. If they didn't play if they weren't stuck with the damn violin, they'd definitely choose another instrument, you know.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
okay, they've been playing since they were 7, and they're better at it than the piano, so they're going to go with that. And they hear that voice, and then they do it, or they go in that direction, and they work with other people, and they get into situations where they make friends and colleagues work with them, and they develop new music, and they challenge themselves, and they push themselves. You know, that's the best.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think that the whole kind of string players kind of clumping together as a group thing is sometimes problematic. I think that it's very obviously fun, and it's also, when you get into a group of string players and you're playing, you all kind of know where you're coming from, and it can be a great moment to check in with your instrument. And I'm not discouraging people from doing that.
Yeah, no, obviously.
But it's a little bit like, eating mashed potatoes with gravy
Every day.
every day, and not eating the leafy greens. I don't know.
Yeah,
There I go with analogies. I can't help myself.
Did you miss your dinner time or something like that?
Actually, yes, I haven't had dinner, so yes.
Yeah, me either. So yeah, let me come up with my own food analogy. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, but it's true. I mean, in music, we do need that diversity, like what you're saying. We need to push ourselves and associating ourselves with instruments that are, very different than ours. But at the same time, it is good to have that, a homogenous feeling. Being with other instruments that are the same.
Yeah, you can learn a lot. Like, there's things that you can learn about your instrument it's really worthwhile. Like, if you're going to go to a string camp and stuff like that. Just don't fool yourself into thinking that that's necessarily the whole picture. Unless that's what you want to do. I don't know. Who cares? Actually, do that. Do that so that,
Yeah.
Don't do. I don't know. I'm all over the place.
No, but I mean, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I mean, the violin. Here's the reason, folks, why everybody groans when violin players come into the jam session. It's not because it's a violin. It's because they've had these experiences where people come in, they don't know this, they don't know the tunes, they can't hear the harmony or reflect it, they've got no language, and they play too long, and they've got a bad sound.
Yeah.
That's why when a violin player walks into a jam session, people are like, oh, yeah, you got to go sign up. Yeah, Larry. That's actually really Steve over here, but they're just telling him to go to Larry. That's why. So it doesn't have to be that way. But these are things that people that play the violin and cello and the viola, need to be really serious about, and don't ask me. And I'm no perfect example. I'm trying as hard as I can, like some people. But think about what people have done in the past. Think about these pioneers that have come before us, and really take the time to ponder. And yes, Grappelli, yes, of course, but you got to go a little bit past 1930.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that happened between 1930 and right now. And if you want to be out there on the contemporary scene as a musician, just like if you were a piano player, you can't just only listen to all the great piano players of the 30s and then jump into the world of contemporary jazz and expect to,
It's kind of like a disconnect. You kind of, you are disconnected from history in a way. By not knowing, what happened. There are things that just, are even it's kind of like, when somebody asks you do you read the news? Are you even aware what's going on today?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing with music.
It's your job, for sure. And now, when I was getting into this, I was ignorant about a lot of stuff because I did not have access. It didn't exist. It was pre-internet.
Yeah.
So things
Just a
were, there was
library.
something called being out of print.
Yeah. Oh.
When something was out of print, you couldn't hear it unless you found it at the library or you found it at somebody's house and they let you listen to it and maybe let you make a tape of it or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But nowadays, all of the out of print stuff, I mean, all you have to do is type in one keyword into YouTube and it's there.
Yeah.
There's no excuse, you know, to not go down that rabbit hole and stay there for your whole life, or stay there for years and really, really learn. You know, for those out there that are frustrated by what I'm saying because they want to know, you know, Eddie South, Joe Venuti at the very beginning of jazz violin, Stefan Grappelli with Django coming on later, and there was actually a lot of players back then. Michael Warlop and oh man, a bunch of cats. I can't even remember all their names. They have little recordings you can hear. You know, this was all happening, you know, in the the 30s. Then, so then in the 30s, this guy comes along named Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Went by the name Stuff Smith. He got this name Stuff because he never remembered anybody's name. He couldn't remember anybody's name, and so, but he was just a larger than life personality. How many people out there have seen the Great Day in Harlem photo? Right, it's the famous black and white photo with all the people in New York. That you seen that picture? They're all kind of like on the brownstone in Harlem, and it's like everybody. It's like, you know, Monk, Dizzy Gillespie.
Oh, yeah.
They're all there. Sonny Rollins, Benny Golson. So right in the middle, at the focal point of the picture, is the great Coleman Hawkins, who certainly at the time was the preeminent tenor saxophone player of jazz. Standing right next to him, smoking a cigarette and talking some, you know what, is Stuff Smith. Okay? So Stuff would forget everybody's name, but he didn't care that he forgot your name. That didn't make him shy. He'd just come up and be like, "What's happening, Stuff?" And he would call you Stuff when he didn't know your name. So then people started calling him Stuff, and that's how he got the nickname Stuff Smith.
Nice.
So Stuff Smith comes along in the 30s, and Stuff is you know, he's come through Chicago. He's in New York. He's in Harlem. He wants to play the music of the day, and he also has this idea of playing the violin like a horn player or a vocalist or some combination, some other sound that he has in his head. He's still playing all this, you know, taking solos and octaves and playing these ripping things and this crazy, you know, technique. I don't know, you know, it's like something miraculous, you know. They say that Heifetz used to go see him play.
Oh, wow.
You know, yeah. I mean, you know, cats would go, you know, check him out. But he wanted to play with these bands that had a bunch of horns and drums and stuff like that. You know, this was starting to be the time where jazz was moving. You know, it was, you know, the big bands, but they were starting to break down into some smaller bands. And so Stuff wanted to play the violin. So how did you do that? You know, Stuff figured out a way. There was like this one type of pickup that you would just stick on any instrument. You know, it wasn't made for the violin. It was made for probably a
guitar,
I don't even know,
maybe
a guitar or something like an accordion or something like that. And it was basically a little disc with a coil inside that vibrated. And it was a round circle. It's the Schertler makes a modern version of it. It's basically the same thing, I think. And Stuff stuck this on the top of his violin and got one of the first, like, you know, it was a tube amp. This is in the 30s.
Yeah, tube amps, yeah.
Fronted his own band. And to me, that is kind of the genesis of, or definitely the next big progression, because jazz had changed from the 20s into the 30s.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
was like 30s going into the 40s, and there was big changes happening in the instrumentation and in jazz. And Stuff Smith was there conceptually and technologically, so that he could play the violin in the way that he wanted to play it and be heard in the same instrumentation with the same intensity as a horn player.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this, but like violin was actually one of the first instruments to be used in jazz, and then
Yep.
and then we had the problem with volume, as you
Yep.
mentioned. That was one thing that kind of like prevented people from playing violin in a jazz setting because why would I want to go through so much, have a huge cable coming down from my violin, try to get it balanced when I can just play a horn and you know and that's and that kind of like, do you think there was kind of like a not like a death, but kind of like a, I don't know, a little downfall of like the popularity of violin in jazz?
Yeah, for sure. Because once again, this is kind of the beginning of the jam session problem. Is that if you go into a jam session where there's players of all instruments, first of all, the volume level is set by the loudest instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if there's a drummer at the jam session, then that is, you have to be able to start at that level. And if there's 5 trumpet players and 3 alto players and 7 tenor players, just be glad you're not the piano player.
Yeah.
So anyway, I go off on these tangents, but I love this stuff. So
No, yeah, and like again with the volume thing, it's kind of like, okay, let's say you go to a gig, there's amps and this and that, but okay, but then you have the sound guys, and it's, I don't know, if my experience, I think that, I don't know, it's like a sound guy sees a violin, they just don't know what to do.
no,
They don't
no,
know what to do with a violin. It's like,
no, that's very true. I mean, there are, of course, some amazing sound engineers out there, and you know, as a string player, you have it. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that are the most important just only come through experience.
yeah,
It's there's going to be some painful moments, but if you just keep trying to figure out how to get the sound in your head out into the different environments that you're playing in, and you don't settle, and keep trying to make it closer and closer to what you're ideally hearing,
mm-hmm.
you will start to acquire the technical language that will help good sound engineers.
Mm-hmm.
You'll know frequencies that are problematic, or you'll know that, like, above this frequency you like to do this type of a filter, or if they could roll it off, like, don't say turn down the highs.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you can. It might be a little bit better to say, like, at around like 2K, if we could just roll off something there, then you're already going to be on. That's like some really basic stuff, but you're already going to be on a more solid foundation, a better relationship with the sound engineer.
Yeah, and
And
that's
if you
all.
say, turn down the highs,
Yeah.
you know.
And that's another issue with the violin. It's kind of like, if you love the violin sound, it's really hard to get that in a live environment, because if you use electric violin, what's an electric violin? It has a different sound. If you use a microphone, there's so much feedback issues, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
stuff that
It's never ending. It's never ending, and fortunately, I think that if you stick with it, you get more solutions. I usually have at least one minor sound failure. At least I see it as a failure. About once every 6 gigs, I'll run into something that I just can't solve.
yeah.
And it's super frustrating. Then there's other things that you have to deploy. You have to deploy psychology, and you also have to lean on experience, and try to work with the group. For instance, if your amplified sound is just not happening and it's just really taking you out of the music, if there's a way that you can talk to the group and bring the volume down so that the violin can be more on a slightly more natural footing, just things like that.
Yeah.
can help out.
Yeah, I mean, there's
But
countless times I've seen groups, and there's a violinist there, and you just see this, but you don't hear anything at all. It's kind of like it looks kind of
yeah,
sick what he's doing, but I just can't hear anything.
yeah, that's that happens to me all the time.
Yeah. It's kind of
It
like,
happens. It happens to me all the time.
yeah,
Um,
I
it
speak from my
happens to me.
experience too.
Yeah, I mean, you're you are at the mercy of that, and there's things that you can do. You know, getting a really good preamp, and especially getting a, I mean, any kind of a preamp is a big is a must really. But
Yeah.
if especially I would invest that extra, hundred or few $100s or whatever to get a preamp that has some sort of a parametric EQ. So something that doesn't just have high and low, or like high, medium, and low, but like a preamp where at least one of the bands gives you the ability to specify a frequency range. Like, oh, I'm going to put this at, I'm going to center the mid frequency at 750 hertz, um, because I know that that has the certain characteristic in the sound that can either be really nasty, like when my violin sounds like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
That's where if I do a little cut, sometimes it cleans up. Or if my violin sounds thin and scratchy, sometimes a little bump there
Mm-hmm.
helps out.
Yeah, yeah.
But you got to get with other people that know this stuff, and you just have to ask questions, take notes. I have so many Evernotes and things in notebooks of. And one of the first, I remember this one session that I had with Mark Feldman, who, if those of you out there that know Mark Feldman will know, that Mark is really known for staunchly playing the acoustic violin, no matter what setting, and he is just dedicated to that sound. And one thing that Mark really, really knows how to do, besides play the crap out of the violin, is he knows how to communicate to sound engineers or recording engineers or
Mm-hmm.
whatever exactly in a frequency range descriptive way, how his violin needs to sound, and he can listen and hear what's going on and be like, oh, I need this here or whatever. And he took the time to sit down with me and describe some of that stuff, and I still have a notebook where I wrote in my handwriting his notes
And
about that.
that's
It's incredible.
something that violinists really never dealt with. Electric guitarists like, yeah, yeah, that's easy, because that's their whole life is based on that. The violin, we it's kind of like, what's an amplifier? Like, what's a
Yeah.
preamp? Oh, you have to,
Oh yeah.
the amp isn't enough. You need a preamp also. It's like, what? The guitar's like,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, and also we're playing, for the most part, we're playing out of guitar gear
yeah,
most of the time, and guitar gear is made to make a guitar sound good.
yeah, but not a
So
violin.
there's a lot of information sonically in guitar gear that goes below the range of the violin, and then there's a lot of stuff up above that the guitar gear doesn't have. So sometimes when you're turning down the treble on certain guitar amps, you're not even really turning down what you would call treble on the violin. You're really just turning down the mids.
Yeah, mm-hmm. That's
You
true.
know, and once again, getting in there and understanding. For anybody out there that's like really intimidated by this, just it's you can make it more simple by just saying, think about the characteristics of your instrument that you like, and try to find out where those things happen, and then also try to find out the things that kind of cause you to cringe or that you try to overcome, and try to find out where those happen. You can do I mean, a lot of people out there have GarageBand. If you have a Mac, it comes with your computer, and GarageBand or Logic have, for instance, an EQ thing. I don't know if we talked about this before, but I do this all the time. I get a new piece of gear. You can turn on this your multi-band EQ with it has a real-time frequency analyzer. So what that means is you can play into the microphone and literally watch where the frequencies are popping
Oh,
up.
okay.
And not just the tone, but like all of your overtones and stuff like that. So if you're trying out a new pickup, and you're playing and you're like, oh, I think this sounds good, but every time I move my bow, I'm hearing this thumping sound.
Yeah, yeah.
If you actually record that, and the great thing about doing it on GarageBand or Logic is then you recorded it, you can stop playing and you can sit back and look at it, go to the computer and be like, oh, I see every time the thing goes like that, it's happening on these frequencies. So if you're using a preamp, for instance, that has the ability to choose at least one of the frequencies, you can put it on that and reduce it. And that's why you want to do it, is to, just to clean that up. So you just got to know, and you really got to know what's happening on the violin below 120 hertz.
Kind of like
Nothing.
the science, the physics of the violin. Yeah.
I mean, it is, but it's like, I think a lot of the functional stuff, I mean, I'm, certainly no scientist in this, but a lot of it is just really common sense.
Yeah.
I mean, there's of course I mean, every instrument has a different frequency range. So if you just start with knowing what the frequency range of your instrument is and then work within that, it can really help out. And then ask yourself just like practical questions. Like, for instance, imagine you're hearing Itzhak Perlman or Hilary Hahn playing some amazing classical violin. Now, imagine that their playing is coming out of some sort of an amplifier that turns all those sounds of their violin up as loud as a drum. Do you think that would still sound good?
No, I mean, there's going to be a lot of feedback.
Well, I mean, let's say there wasn't even feedback. But like when, Itzhak Perlman is wailing on, some Tchaikovsky on some super high note, the actual quality that allows an acoustic violin to cut over an orchestra, imagine turning that up to drum level and how that would feel in your ear.
Yeah, I don't think we could handle that.
No, so right then and there, you start to realize that there's like the realistic sound of the violin, the acoustic sound. And as the volume goes up, certain characteristics of the actual instrument have to be attenuated. They have to be, you don't want those sounds that allow an acoustic violin to cut through a certain part of an orchestration amplified. You don't want to turn those up, so I mean, you got to ask yourself those kind of questions.
Yeah. So and the violin is, like you're saying, it kind of like, we do have a lot of limitations because of the way it's built, and there's a lot of stuff we just have. There's a lot of new things we're dealing with, but thankfully in the 21st century we have more technology that is helping us deal with that. And I think it's kind of leading us to like a renaissance in jazz violin, since there's so much more information out there, as you said, and so much more awareness of of the capabilities of the violin. And in general, I think jazz violin, like I said, it's becoming more famous. I mean, even this year, Snarky Puppy, the new solo, the new song Heavy, it features a jazz violin. I wonder who that is. And that's, I mean, if we're looking at like a single, that's what I meant to say. If we're looking at like jazz singles, you compare from last year from like big bands, like famous bands, a violin, isn't really there. This year we have Javi, and then now we got, like you and I spoke before the interview, we had Regina Carter, as a violinist, was nominated for Best Jazz Solo, which is not every day a violinist gets nominated for that, So I think, everything that's happened in the past is kind of like, there is a somewhat of improvement,
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, there have never been more resources at your fingertips. There's more violin players now than ever. There's more.
There's a future for us.
Yeah, man, there is. There's more outlets for people to, get in there, and get into it. And it's fantastic. And the technology is there's a lot of choices over a fairly comparable price point range. Like there's what I mean is like the cheaper pickups versus like the better ones are really not. It's not like there's pickups that cost you $5,000, something like that.
Yeah.
So I personally, there's things that I play that I just do. Like, I don't get stuff for free. I just play it because I think it sounds the best.
Yeah.
Or I like the way that it feels and plays. I've been playing Eric Aceto's pickups since like 1999.
Oh, nice.
And I was using other pickups. I have a box of pickups. I probably have a box of what probably represents at least $3,000 worth of pickups.
Wow.
Over the years, I've tried them all. I've tried, I have tried almost all of them. The only pickup that I haven't had is a electromagnetic pickup, just because I haven't bought a violin to put one of those on. But Eric's pickups are just are fantastic.
Eric, can you repeat that for those who are?
Yeah, Eric Aceto.
Eric Aceto. Okay.
Yeah, and his Ithaca, New York, Ithaca stringed instruments, and it's called the ISI pickup.
Okay.
And that's great. I've used preamps by Bags and by Fishman, and I've for years I used to travel with a bunch of those. I would always have at least two of those Bags Para DIs because they have a little semi-parametric EQ thing on them.
Okay.
It's great, and they can fit inside a lot of violin cases. That's a great tool to have. I think they make an even smaller one that I could have checked out, but it didn't have the parametric thing. The Fishman Platinum DI, I remember Jean-Luc was using that, and he told me about that. I got one of those, and I liked that. It had a certain different sound. But the one that I'm really excited about that I've been playing now, especially in the tours with Snarky now for the past 3 years. I've been playing these preamps by this company called Grace Design, and they're a small company out of Colorado, and they really made a name for themselves in super high-end audiophile listening and also recording stuff. Like really really high-end studio gear. Like, you're not going to find this stuff in retail stores.
Yeah,
it's like
in Best Buy.
Yeah, you're not going to find it there. And somehow, for some reason, we were all really lucky that they, like, I don't know when it was, like maybe 4 years ago, they decided to build this stereo preamp that has 2 parallel channels with parametric EQ in every possible in and out. And it's built like a tank, like it's like metal that thick.
Wow.
It's like
throw
really,
it around.
really hefty. Yeah, it's like a serious piece of gear. Like, you could step on it, somebody could walk across it on stage, and it's not gonna crush it. And I got one of those, and that was then a whole nother level of clarity. Their stuff, it doesn't have it doesn't really have a color to it. It's just sort of the way that your pickup sounds.
Yeah, it's flat, right?
It's very flat, but you have a lot of power to sculpt the thing. I could go on and on about it. And then they made a little 1-channel version, and that's what I usually take on the road with Snarky, because I'm trying not to have like a gigantic pedal board.
Yeah, the prices go up on flights. It'll take a bunch of.
Yeah, well, fortunately, when you're traveling with Snarky Puppy, you can just bring gear. They do that. So actually, if I ever wanted to have an expansive pedal board, that would be. But then again, you only end up using 1 or 2 sounds, per song, maximum. Usually one sound per song. So I like that 1-channel version a lot because I can put all my pedals into it, and it has a really great effects loop built into the preamp. So it takes a TRS cable, it's like a stereo tip ring send thing. It comes out, and I just put the send at the front first pedal in my chain, and at the end of my pedal I put a return. Then it has a thing out of the back of the preamp that goes straight into my amp. So that's just like, you know, you would imagine it would be. But then the sound engineer can put an XLR right into my preamp, bypassing the amp, and get all of my sound with my tone and my effects.
Nice.
That's why I really, really love it, because it's not, there's some preamps out there where basically if they take it direct out of your preamp, it just sends a raw signal. That's the last thing I ever want to send to a sound engineer.
Because you kind of you're in their hands, right? Like you're at the mercy of, you know, whatever they do there. You have no control of your sound.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, and still ultimately you don't really. But one thing that can really help and can get you more in the direction, and you know, is to have something that the sound that it sends is sending post EQ, like whatever EQ things that you've made. The signal that's going out is after that, and really in an ideal sense, if you can also include, you know, even if your effect is just a certain type of reverb that you like, or a certain delay, even if it's like a subtle thing, it doesn't have to be some rock explosion.
Yeah,
you know, but you want to be able to do that, because, you know, I mean, a lot of times if you're playing in a situation like that, and you're playing with other loud instruments, they're going to want to have, that's the most isolated sound that you can send. They'll still have a microphone on your amp, but that microphone might be also right in front of whenever I play with Snarky, I'm always right in front of the drums.
Oh.
So my amp is like just right in front of Larnell's bass drum, you know. I mean, it's, you know, back a little bit, you know, but it's not exactly the most isolated thing. So, you know, I think that honestly, I mean, you'd have to ultimately ask them what they do, but I think that a lot of the time they just take the direct sound. They let the amp sound sort of just be the tone in the room. You know, I don't think that any of the live records they're really taking much of. Well, I mean, on the live records, I guess they're kind of blending the sound, you know, a little bit. But anyway, that's a little tip I have for violin players out there. If you're trying to get your thing across, you know, if you can have your amplified sound in a tight little package where whatever you're delivering to the front of house sounds as close to your ideal of what you want it to sound like as possible, and then you let them do their thing, you know. Don't try to, you know, they hear things out there that you don't hear, and they also hear you sitting in the band, you know. A lot of times, like, I used to go really overboard and sort of do the Pat Metheny, the early Pat Metheny thing, where I would just turn all of my treble off. My violin was kind of like that, but, you know, then I could turn it up really loud, and I like that. But then when you actually think about, but then how does that sit in the ensemble? Like if it's just me playing trio, that might be one thing. But if I'm playing with an alto saxophone or a trumpet that has a certain timbre or cut to its, you know, thing, they have to be able to set you in there. Anyway, I could go on and on forever about this stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming. You know, to the interview. And
I wish I was there in the beautiful
Patagonia.
Place you are, man. Oh my God, are you kidding me? It's like 25 degrees here in New York, just freezing and just kind of nasty.
It's yesterday or a few days ago went up to 104. So if you ever want to come down and melt here.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's dry heat, right?
Yeah, it's extremely dry. I've never been in a place that's so dry in my life. Like literally never been. So yeah. Well, if you ever come with Snarky over here to Argentina, you know, you're more than welcome to the beautiful Patagonia.
I got so many fingers crossed. Yeah, man. Well, it's a real pleasure spending time hanging with you, man. Talking about this stuff. Obviously, you know, I would be happy to go talking on and on for 7 hours until.
Oh yeah, me too.
I'm so, you know, I'm just always. excited, about this. I'm
Hmm.
excited to talk to you about this kind of stuff. It's not that often that you get to engage with another violin player about this kind of stuff. So
Or a violin player who plays jazz,
yeah,
who's done the struggle,
yeah,
Yeah, the struggle is real.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and
Yeah, man. Thank
just
you.
just to let everybody know who's listening, Javi is the violin solo is done by yours truly, Zach Brock, most famous person from Lexington, Kentucky.
Haha, except for the other people that are more famous than me, which there's a few, but
Yeah.
not
Well,
amongst jazz violin players though.
yeah, the most famous jazz violinist, right? Yeah.
It's a pleasure, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
You are welcome. I'll
Yeah.
talk to you soon.
Yeah. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, world.
See ya.
All right. Later.